Now, I need to distinguish a fool, a comedian, and someone subject to folly. I feel foolery is intentional. Like you're intentionally making a joke, you're in on the joke. Whereas folly is unintentional. You know, someone who is participating in foolery is playing, they're having a good time, they're making jokes, they're in on the joke. You know, they're part of it. Whereas folly, they are the joke. I started a joke. Now, tomfoolery, you are in command. You are the puppet master. You are in control of these jokes. That is tomfoolery. Now, let's distinguish this from comedians because I believe comedians are the least likely to be made a fool. The comedian is like the illusionist to the magician. The comedian knows the tricks of foolery. They can work the magic of foolery. And this is why satire is so important. This is why good comedians are so important. And it is kind of their job to point out folly in a society. So they would use their foolery to point out the folly of the society. And when they fail to use their foolery, tomfoolery at that, to point out the folly in society, well, then they have failed as a comedian. The difference between a clown and a comedian. I could go on. You let me know in the modern American vernacular, what do these words mean? Fool, clown, folly, foolery, tomfoolery. Anyway, I hope you got all your little giggles out of the way because this video is about the Holocaust. The Holocaust is legit one of the worst things that has ever happened. It's awful. It's like we didn't witness. It's like our grandparents witnessed in their lifetime the Mongols taking over Eurasia. Like that's how bad it was in such a short amount of time, probably a shorter amount of time. And the thing about what happened in the 20th century, which was awful, god awful, the worst thing, is how foolish it was. It was so stupid. We discussed in the other video about the banality of evil, how unoriginal, how uninspired, how derivative it was. Basic bitch kind of shit. Kind of these slogans, which I guess if you were in Nazi times, would your Michaels sell these Nazi slogans that you can hang in your living room? Like instead of live, laugh, love, is it like hate the Jews? But by pointing out how stupid this is, we can actually use comedy to break the spell. Because a lot of these people with their slogans, which we just discussed, a lot of these people with their slogans are kind of under a spell. They're kind of hypnotized, mass formation psychosis. We discussed in that video as well. They're kind of hypnotized. And sometimes the benefit of comedy, the benefit of satire is simply to break the spell. People go into their rabbit holes of crazy. They don't realize it's crazy because it's reinforced on all sides by other crazy people. I shouldn't say crazy. People who are in this feedback loop of ideas that are derivative and meaningless and silly and don't hold up to scrutiny. So these people are in a feedback loop of this. They don't want to hear anything that is not to do with the feedback loop. And so the best use of comedy, of satire, is to break them free, to shake them and be like, that's a stupid idea. You spent your whole life savings on what? You sound goofy. And hopefully the reaction to that isn't like, the reaction to that is like, oh man, that was pretty goofy. Okay, let me move on. Ha 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 ha. It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled because people don't want to be the fool. Everybody plays the fool sometimes. It's no exception to the rule. Especially in love, because in love, we are under a spell as well. Okay, let's move on. The Holocaust. You're like, stop talking about comedy. We want to hear about the Holocaust. Okay, here goes. Of Folly. This is by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. If you remember from my last video on slogans, I got into a full shower argument with someone in the comment section about how Dietrich Bonhoeffer was an OG and deserves all the respect. And nobody had said otherwise. But just a brief summary. Hold for plane. Hold for cat, causing problems in the other room. So brief summary. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a preacher, Lutheran preacher in Germany when the Nazis came to power, and he opposed them from jump. He never went along with their little game. And people will say, well, not everybody was playing Nazi. Yeah, but they all went along with it, huh? And there's so few people who didn't go along with it that they are basically heroes. It shows a lot of strength. It shows a lot of moral courage. It shows a lot of moral intelligence and confidence that most people don't have. I would say, yeah, no, most people will go along with some bullshit. Most people will go along with the mass formation psychosis. In mass formation psychosis, we discussed that 30% are under the hypnosis. They're under the spell. And then 30% just go along with it because they don't want to ruffle any feathers. And then you have 30% plus or minus either way. You got 30% who are like, no, this is nonsense. And of those 30%, a lot of them, when push comes to shove, will flee. Some of them will fight. But as Hannah Arendt pointed out, that not enough stood and fought the Nazis in Germany to absolve the Germans of the crimes of the Nazis. Do you know what I mean? Like, so many went along with what was happening just because that's what was happening. That's what the slogan said. That's on which side their bread was buttered, that it sort of has tarnished the German name ever since. Of course, we don't believe the Germans are like that now. We do not believe that at all. But what happened and how people went along with is legitimately terrifying. Since World War II, we have learned that most people will go along with things they know full well they shouldn't go along with. The Milgram experiment tested whether people would shock a subject to death if they were told to do it. And 2/3 of people would have shocked that subject to death. So it can happen to most of us.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
You
here.
can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man, there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Slow, truck, music. This dude is about to kill a stranger, an actor, but he thinks he's about to kill a stranger talking about slow, truck, music. That is absurd. That is the definition of absurdity. All that to say that I am not picking on the Germans. I am picking on humans in general. I'll actually post a picture on the screen because this is actually under 2 pages and you can pause and read the whole thing. I'm just going to go with the most important points that I had pointed out. Of folly. Folly is a more dangerous enemy to the good than evil. One can protest against evil. It can be unmasked and, if need be, prevented by force. Evil always carries the seeds of its own destruction, as it makes people, at the least, uncomfortable. Against folly, we have no defense. Neither protest nor force can touch it. Reasoning is no use. Facts that contradict personal prejudices can simply be disbelieved. Indeed, the fool can counter by criticizing them, and if they are undeniable, they can just be pushed aside as trivial exceptions. So the fool, as distinct from the scoundrel, is completely self-satisfied. In fact, he can easily become dangerous, as it does not take much to make him aggressive. A fool must therefore be treated more cautiously than a scoundrel. We shall never again try to convince a fool by reason, for it is both useless and dangerous. Seemed like Bonhoeffer tried, didn't work out. He's like, look, I know for a fact we cannot convince a fool by reason. And that's why I'm hanging here today. I might just go ahead and read this whole thing. It's brilliant. Okay. If we are to deal adequately with folly, we must try to understand its nature. This much is certain, that it is a moral rather than an intellectual defect. Because we've noticed that these people who are subject to folly, who are subject to these slogans, to these catchphrases, to these cliches, they're not dumb people. We thought they would be dumb people, but they're not. They're not stupid. They're not intellectually uncurious even. We get the impression that folly is likely to be not a congenital defect, but one that is acquired in certain circumstances where people make fools of themselves or allow others to make fools of them. Notice this, that foolishness is an action. It's an action, because if you think a foolish thought, okay, whatever. But then you have to take action to be a fool. Just because you think a foolish thought doesn't mean anything. We all think foolish thoughts all the time. But to make actions, to take actions, that's when you become a fool. Speaking is an action. I have spoken my foolish thought. Okay. And people online will attack you for it. Okay, there you go. That's an action. Or you can act out these slogans, these catchphrases. Now you are acting a fool. You're acting a damn fool. You're acting a fool. Can you be a fool without acting a fool? Let me know in the comments. But here, people make fools of themselves or allow others to make fools of them. So who makes fools of them? The people who start the hashtags, the people who start the catchphrases, the people who have all these ideas. They make fools of other people. They take the action of convincing other people to act on these foolish ideas. They make fools. Check out that interview, Fans, Stands, and Cults. People are made fools by toxic groups, both online and in person. So they make fools of other people. They facilitate this foolery. It's crazy. It's such a crazy concept. Like when you think about it, I'm like, oh my God. Hey, this is happening now. You ever been reading books from the Second World War from history and be like, oh shoot, that's what just happened now. Should I be worried? Oh my God. I'm just going to say this one thing. There's something in this book, The Banality of Evil. She like points out very specifically that we're coming to an age where there's going to be a lot of surplus people that we won't need for work because of automation. She's like, well, watch out. They don't try to get rid of them all. Okay, bye. Like, what? You're just going to drop that on us and then end with a bye? Because, as we know, when our ancestors die, they end with a bye. Don't be made a fool. Bye. And then he hangs. It's sad. It's sad. Now, I read this in the last video on slogans, but it bears repeating. And I've repeated it over and over again, and I'll repeat it over and over again in the years to come because it is that important, and we are dealing with hashtags. Okay. It is not that certain human capacities, intellectual capacities, for instance, become stunted or destroyed, but rather that the upsurge of power makes such an overwhelming impression that men are deprived of their independent judgment, and more or less unconsciously give up trying to assess the new state of affairs for themselves. Where do we see this? The culture war. My God, what a mess. And this sort of thinking I put in my notes is a difference between subjects and citizens, because citizens have to think for themselves. That's why democracy demands more of the people than a monarchy, because a monarchy, they're not citizens, they're subjects. They don't have to think for themselves. They give up their thinking to the ruler, and the ruler gives them bread and says, you're a good subject, aren't you? And you're like, I am a good subject. Yeah, so that's the difference between a citizen and a subject. The fact that the fool is often stubborn must not mislead us into thinking that he is independent. The fact that the fool is often stubborn must not mislead us into thinking that he is independent. This is Twitter, okay? You just describe Twitter in one line. One feels, in fact, when talking to him, that one is dealing not with the man himself, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like, which have taken hold of him. Hashtags. Hashtags. These are hashtags. He is under a spell. He is blinded. His very nature is being misused and exploited. Having thus become a passive instrument, a tool for an idea, which we talked about in The Shadow, we talked about with archetypes. A tool for an idea. Having thus become a passive instrument, the fool will be capable of any evil, and at the same time, incapable of seeing that it is evil. He thinks that he is doing good. Road to hell. Here lies the danger of a diabolical exploitation that can do irreparable damage to human beings because it hijacks their humanity. So there's two aspects to humanity. There's the thinking aspect of humanity. I am a human. I think, therefore I am. I am a human. But there's also the humanity, which is we are the most advanced animals. We can pick locks. Okay, we can use language. We can use these advanced technologies. We understand these advanced technologies. We understand mathematics. So this is uniquely human. Maybe dolphins get math. I don't know if dolphins get math. So I'm not going to say it's uniquely human, but they don't have thumbs. They don't have thumbs, do they? So look, this aspect of us being so advanced, that is human. But humanity, he speaks of it in a different way. He speaks of it as a soul in a religious way, in a free will kind of way. Go back and watch that video. Is there something, is free will real? Skinner talks about how to hijack somebody's free will to convince them that they have free will when really they're doing what you want them to do. And this is how we do this. We do this with slogans. Go check out that video. So that's what he says. Here lies the danger of diabolical exploitation that can do irreparable damage to human beings. Because you kill a man, you do terrible damage to him. But you haven't killed his humanity. You've killed his body. But when you kill someone's humanity, it's when you convince them to do some evil, some absolutely disgusting things like happened in the Crucible. They hanged their neighbors. Over the course of a year or so, 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 or 5 by 5, they hanged their neighbors. That took their humanity. They didn't take the humanity of the people they hanged. Bonhoeffer died, humanity intact. The people doing it, they lost their humanity. They were made fools by this idea, this mind virus, these slogans, these catchphrases. It's so diabolical. That's what he says. Diabolical exploitation. Okay, so this is what we were talking about earlier with comedy and satire. So listen. So at this point, it is quite clear, too, that folly can be overcome, not by instruction, but only by an act of liberation. So you got to break the fever. People are under this spell. You got to break the spell. You got to break the fever. What is that? Satire. Oh, you look real dumb, don't you? Oh, your idea don't make any sense. Ha ha. And we joke about it. We're like, ha 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 ha. Your idea was stupid. And so we have come to terms with the fact that in the great majority of cases, inward liberation must be preceded by outward liberation. And that until that has taken place, we may as well abandon all attempts to convince the fool. Now, he goes on to say, the Bible's words that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Psalms 111:10, tells us that a person's inward liberation to live a responsible life before God is the only real cure for folly. And I get that, and we discussed this before, that some people need God in their lives, but some people just can understand pure reason. And this is humanism versus Christianity. And at the end of the day, so don't act like an idiot. Don't be a fool. Don't act a fool. Like, have a code that works. Like, you can even use that with Marcus Aurelius with the meditations are very good, even though Marcus Aurelius acted a fool too. So, you know what? We're going to act a fool. It's going to get into our blind spot. That's why we always have to be on the lookout for it. That to live a responsible life before God is the only real cure for folly. That's what he says, and he's an OG. An atheist can replace the Lord in this sentence with absolute reality. It might be a little blasphemous, but it'll work in a pinch. You know, just making fun of someone's foolishness can snap them out of it real quick. Because it is, it's like a fever. It's like people think these ideas and they're so into them. They're so into this person. They're so into this cult. They're so into this group. And then just something just snaps in their head and they're like, oh, this is stupid. I believe this for how long? The takeaway. What's the big takeaway? Why are you saying this about folly and foolishness and tomfoolery and the like? Why are you saying this? Well, we're not above this. It can happen to us. We've seen it happen to most of society over the past 2 years. And on top of that, we see a lot of individuals being made fools and falling into these mind traps of the internet, these internet spaces, various internet spaces. I'm going to go and do a video on that, but just know that they're falling into these spaces. They're like literally in a mind room. Not literally. They're it's the opposite of literal. It's figurative. It's like 100% figurative because they're not in a mind room. They're in their house and they could turn off the laptop and go outside and be out of that mind room. But they are in a mind room and it's an echo chamber of the same thoughts. And they're made a fool in that echo chamber because it's hijacking what we naturally do in our brains, what we naturally do to be a group, to be a cohesive group. It's hijacking those tools. So all that to say is we are not too good. It can happen to us. It almost happened to us last year. It might happen to us next year. I guess even more importantly is that we get evil. We see evil. Evil is evil. We don't want anything to do with it. That's gross, icky, gross. Evil. However, folly sneaks in through the blind spot. It's like Watiko. It's like the shadow. It's hidden. And so it can sneak in and cause more harm than evil. So he's saying it wasn't evil which brought down Germany. It was folly.
In the days when the Nazis were just a very comical kind of minority party of nuts that nobody took seriously at all.
Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Please let me know in the comments what you think folly, foolery, tomfoolery, foolishness, a clown, and a fool actually mean. All this vocabulary around it, because it can get it's like a spectrum. of like goofy, fun to like holocaust, evil. That's extreme, super extreme. We don't want to be on that spectrum. So let me know where all these words fall on the spectrum. If you like to play word games, Holocaust word games, everybody. Holocaust word games. Subscribe.